son, where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, we are back. It is another episode of the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. And today, we've got a first. We've got Jason Kocher from I2C Jason on TikTok and other social medias that we'll get into. He's an engineer, entrepreneur, science adventurer. Please welcome him to the show. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, everyone.
First of all, how's it going? Thank you for agreeing to come on here and do this. And I hope today wasn't too crazy in the lab.
No, I love to be here because I can put everything else out of my mind and just focus on a conversation with you. So I'm super stoked about it. This is a relief. Today was crazy, by the way.
Well, I mean, I guess that's a good thing. As an independent business owner, having crazy days is always a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't complain about that.
Well, I guess let's just jump right into it. I want you to give kind of a quick background of what you do, just a good solid intro so we don't miss any bullet points, and then we'll kind of just go back to the beginning. What got you into all of this stuff? You're like when we were talking before, you're kind of like the Doc Brown of TikTok. Crazy science experiments, but making it fun and accessible and engaging in a way that drew me in and obviously has drawn other people in. So just go ahead and give yourself a quick intro.
Yeah, man, where do I start? Let's start with TikTok. Okay, so I'm a little bit late to the game there. My wife sort of got me into TikTok because she was working in a hospital at the time and she was on TikTok, and I was like, oh, that's cool, didn't think anything of it. And then I was like, oh man, this is great. I love this app. So I was like, well, let me start my own content creation account there. So I did, and for like a year now, I've been doing videos. Did some stuff on YouTube before that, but basically I'm a research and development electrical engineer, if that makes sense. So I started with an electrical engineering degree right out of the gates, right out of school in 2005. I graduated. I was like, I am not doing this, business. What's the thing when you go to get, everybody submits their GPAs and they're like, job fair. I'm not doing this job fair thing, like competing for a summer internship. I'm just going to start my own business. So I started my business doing like programming microcontrollers because I thought, okay, there's got to be a way for me to forge my own path here and create a business from nothing. And I didn't have a family yet at the time. So I was like, now's my chance to do it. So I did it. I started trying to look for programming jobs, programming PIC microcontrollers. And I found like one or two of those. And I quickly learned that I can just call the shots, like provide proposals, do the job, invoice for it, and live my life that way instead of taking a paycheck like most people. And then fast forward 20 years later, I went from electrical engineering to picking up mechanical engineering skills, a bunch of other skill type stuff that are just little rabbit holes I go down. And I started accumulating equipment at my shop. I have a shop that I do all my work at in near Cleveland, Ohio. So basically, I started accumulating capabilities that would allow me to get my work done on time. So I'm like an engineer that does all of the engineering disciplines and prototyping and tech and all that stuff. So I thought, okay, rather than me just in general for like business development to get what I do out there, I was like, why don't I get like take out a bus ad or like go to a billboard on the side of the road or cold call people and not get past the front desk person. So I was like, you know what, the only way this time and age is to just like do social media and just organically get what I do out there. And then it's just cool because it's entertainment. I learn from everybody else. We all learn together. And then occasionally people reach out and they need projects done. So it's sort of like it's a win-win for everybody. So basically I'm an engineer and I build people's inventions.
I love it. I can't remember the first video that Andrew, our producer, put me onto, but maybe it was one of the LENR videos, and then I was just like going down the list. There's so much cool stuff on your page, and I want to bring it up here just so people can kind of see.
Have some show and tell for you.
Oh, beautiful! Love that.
We'll get into that later.
Yeah, I was hoping there'd be some visual.
Actually got a lot more since we spoke last about this one, so we can go down that rabbit hole if you want later.
Oh, killer! Yeah, I would love to. That as we were talking before on the pre-call, that project interests me for a number of reasons. But your page is just like a great hodgepodge of your work, but then also you freely experimenting with science in your lab. And just so people can kind of get an idea, there's all sorts of stuff you're designing, stuff you're troubleshooting, or like in the many stages of development and developing these complex systems. But then you're also just lighting stuff on fire. Who doesn't love that? Like, how can you not love that?
Right.
And one of the other favorite ones I had was the reactor column. You know, there's so many aspects of engineering that people think are reserved for total nerds. And in many cases that I'm a nerd, I'm a happy nerd, but this, you make it accessible in a way so that even somebody who doesn't have a science or intense engineering background can see it and appreciate it for what it is. Maybe they can't take apart a reactor column, but you give us like an interesting insight into that stuff, and we can kind of live vicariously through it. One of the other videos, I guess this would probably be the better starting point, is you have the video or a piece of paper from like a bill of parts that you made when you were a kid. Can you kind of explain, as a kid, were you the kind of kid who was taking everything apart?
Yeah, 100%. Like to the point where I think I was probably 3 or 4. I don't know, I'd have to ask my parents for the specifics, but I was running around with a screwdriver and they let me do it. So to their credit, they were like, okay, we're going to let this 3-year-old run around with a screwdriver and just hopefully he doesn't gouge his face out, his eyes,
right.
whatever. But, you know, I have a 3-year-old now too, and the thought is terrifying, but I try to like let him play with stuff, but I'm like right there hovering to, you know,
just to make sure. Yeah.
Just to make sure. But yeah,
bad reflexes. Yeah.
To their credit, you know, they let me run around with like real tools as a little kid, and I would start tearing everything apart. And then, you know, relatives would start bringing me old stuff, like old junk that they'd find that I could take apart. And I started accumulating, you know, like typical, like nerdy type thing in my parents' basement. I'm accumulating a pile of stuff that I tore apart. And I would not build a lot back then. I would just tear stuff apart and pretend that it was something. And I think, you know, that's an interesting way to look at it. Like you said, if somebody doesn't have a background in engineering, just simply tearing stuff apart and playing with it and familiarizing yourself with all these little weird things that look like they came from aliens, which maybe some did, you can just learn and absorb it that way. And then you can start going down rabbit holes yourself. So anybody can learn and do this stuff, in my opinion.
And at what point, like in like your teenage years, at what point did you want to put it back together? At what point does it change from like, I'm going to take this apart to understand what the mechanics of this thing are, to, okay, now I know the components, I understand the mechanics, let me see if I can revitalize this broken piece of gear?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that started in, well, probably like middle school. I started putting together circuits back when we had Radio Shack. I don't know. You probably remember Radio Shack.
I sure do.
Right?
Yeah.
So they would have these engineers mini notebooks you could buy for a couple bucks. And then you could put like a photoresistor with a battery and a little buzzer and make it like a light sensitive circuit and stuff. So they had all this type of stuff you could put together. So I started doing that, and that was really what inspired me. I knew early on, like, okay, I want to do electrical engineering. That was just the thing. I don't know if I just heard that word when I was little and said, I'm going to be an electrical engineer, but that stuck with me. And that was like, that actually motivated me all through school to try to like take more math classes, which I hated, and do all these things that would help set me up for this career. So definitely putting stuff together at an early age, but then I would say also high school, like wood shop was a big one for me. When I could actually, instead of sitting in an English class and being told how my speak is, like my lingo is colloquial or some BS, it's like, no, screw you. I want to go down to the wood shop and like make a project. And then I started taking these wood shop classes in high school, and they let me spend like my free periods in the wood shop doing like extra work. So it was great. And that's when I really started building stuff. And I actually had a shop teacher at the time that suggested, well, you know, he literally said, I worked for him a little bit. He said on the job, like, I could see you having your own design firm. And that stuck in my head. Like, I was like, you know what? Yeah, I could do that. So all it took was somebody suggesting it, and then it stuck. And I feel like that's something that if nobody ever suggests that to you, you might just never think to do it.
Well, like we were saying before at the beginning, a lot of this stuff, it occurs not necessarily in the shadows, but it rarely gets a spotlight. And I think people really take for granted the amount of logistics that have to be there for us to have the type of technologically advanced society that we have right now. And it's millions of people just like you who are really building the things or understanding the things that drive the society, but it just doesn't really get talked about, and a lot of this stuff kind of gets taken for granted. And I'm wondering if maybe is that like a part of why you start, on top of advertising for your business, is there a component of the videos and the content that you put out that's really making this stuff more accessible and tangible as like a part of your mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the advertising for the business isn't even something that's on top of like the stack of stuff, right? That's at the very bottom layer. That's sort of like, well, okay, I have to survive. So if that's a side effect of it, that's great. I'll put my resources into that instead of like paying for ads. So that's not even really in the forefront when I'm doing videos. Really what I want to do is just show off. Like I want to show this stuff. Like you said, it's always in the dark. Nobody ever knows what I'm doing. Like I used to post it on Facebook, and my like 200 friends, which are all family and stuff, it just wouldn't connect with them because they're not,
they're not into it. Yeah.
No, they're not into it. You need an audience of like millions of people that it could pop up on their feed. And then eventually you start to build that community organically. So I think all of my followers have, at one point, they've seen a video and it kind of hooked them. They're like, oh, wow, that's weird. Now that's cool. And they click on it. So really the short form social media content, inspiring people to get into this stuff, is definitely number one, and showing off, like those two things together. And I think the reason is, it's been frustrating for like 20 years now to realize that the money in corporations does not go to like engineering and R&D. We're like at the last line on their, costs. It goes to like Super Bowl ads and like all this crap, people who are just showing like maybe more cultural type stuff and not really technology. And I feel like, how are we going to inspire people who aren't good singers or who aren't like good at sports? Like all the like regular people, so many of us could do the stuff I'm doing, and it's so cool, and they might love it. So being able to put this out there and show it hopefully inspires a lot of people. And I get, my inbox is like flooded with young people being like, oh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to get a shop like you have someday. Like, how do I do it?
Love that.
So I always just am trying to like give them whatever 2 cents I could give them as a little bit of advice to help guide them.
Well, and you bring up a couple good points too, and I know that one of the other things that you take a great interest in is actually owning and running a business. And I'm wondering if maybe you could kind of speak on not necessarily some of the learning curve if you're starting your own business, even if you understand that industry, there's going to be a learning curve. But I wonder if you could kind of speak to like going from just I have this knowledge to now I'm trying to market this knowledge in a way that I can support myself, support my family. I am super into non-traditional paths.
Yeah.
I'm a person who's pursued a non-traditional path, and anymore, sad to say, traditional paths don't really exist, and definitely our generation and the generations below us are going to have to get kind of more comfortable.
Yes.
Pursuing, you're not going to go to school and they're not going to tell you how we're not going to get jobs that secure us for 40 years, that those times are done now. So I'd be interested for you to kind of like speak on your experiences getting out of school with a degree and immediately jumping into starting your own business and some of the plateaus you had to ascend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the funniest part is that I can say this in I think it'll be 21 years in June. Nobody has ever asked to see my electrical engineering degree.
Just a piece of paper, man. It's just a piece of paper.
Did that email like ding through what I was saying there, by the way? Because if you couldn't hear that.
No. I didn't hear that.
Okay.
Not at all.
All right. Yeah. So really nobody's ever asked to see an electrical engineering degree in 21 years almost. So now I wouldn't recommend somebody passing themselves off as a degreed engineer and all that. But I guess my point is that you really could, if you nerd out enough on this stuff and if you have your own passion, you can do prototypes for people, charge them money for that service, and then they will pay you, and you just keep doing that, and you could do exactly what I do without a degree. So there's really not the barriers that you might think there are. It's really about owning it. I mean, they say fake it till you make it. I wouldn't that's so true in some ways, but at the same time, it's not faking it. It's kind of like owning it. Like
Yeah.
own what you're going to be. You know, if you're going to be doing podcasts, like you own it. Like who am I to question whether or not you're serious about what you do? Like this is what you do. And from my perspective, you're an expert like anybody else in this, right? So the same can be said about anybody who gets into like a passion project and makes that their career. If you take it seriously, like it's your career, it will become your career. And eventually it'll be all you do, and that'll be your income. And I've always said too that I don't believe that there's job security these days. Obviously, like you said, you're not going to get like a 40-year career somewhere and they'll take care of you. So I sort of exist through job security by not having job security. So it's like I can never count on money coming in this place. So I'm constantly looking for like networking, looking for new opportunities,
Yep.
looking for new rabbit holes to go down. So for example, if I start studying a thermite reaction or something, it's super interesting. It's fun, but guess what? Somebody might come knocking on my door in 6 months saying, hey, we're designing this thing that actually needs a thermite. We saw your video, blah, blah. And before you know it, it's like a whole new thing that I become an expert at. And no, I wouldn't have a degree in like thermite design. It's like, these are just things that you can focus on, learn yourself, teach yourself the skills. And I would guess that that would extend to like any other industries, especially if you're going to be a musician, if you're going to be like creating some sort of crazy new type of like synth music or something. Like just go for it, you know, and own it. But you have to put in the work and you have to take it seriously. Like you have to work as hard as you can. That's all I got to really say about like starting your own business. You have to put in the work. That paycheck's not going to come on its own. Like you can't sit back like somebody might be able to if they're on payroll and they know how to budget their finances and all that. You have to assume that there's always a cliff right in front of you. And you never know when you're going to go over that cliff. And if you treat it that way, you'll never go over the cliff. There'll always be something there. I use an analogy of like, I'm trying to cross a stream and I'm hopping from like rock to not get wet. And there's never a rock that I can see. There's like one or two that I could sort of visualize and create and like manifest these paths. And eventually they show up, but they're not there until you really make it happen.
No, that's all good advice. And I was actually just talking to one of my buddies who's getting into voiceover stuff. And I was at the end of the conversation, we were going over a bunch of the tech stuff. And I was like, there's a psychological component here that is just as important. And if you're not telling yourself this is what I do, and I have confidence in myself, no one else is going to have that in you. Like no one else is
Right.
going to be like, you know what? I know you don't believe in yourself, but I do. That's just going to be a real rare thing. You have to wake up every day and say, this is what I do. And I always tell that to my friends who are like in some kind of weird creative funk doing music or something. Like, this is what you do. This is what you do. And it's okay. Some days it's easy. Some days it's not easy, but this is what you do. You have to do it. And I'm wondering if there's like was there a moment after, and this could have been maybe even in college or after you start the business, was there a moment where you were like, oh, here I am, I'm doing it now. This is real.
Yeah, it's oh man, that's a great question. It's funny because I still have those like epiphanies like 2 decades later. Where
That's good. That's a good thing though.
it is. I mean, I tell my wife, I'm like, you know, because she started work with me like 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm like, holy shit, like, look, we're doing it. Like we're surviving on our own. Like nobody controls us. That's what everybody would want. Nobody wants to be under the thumb of some, you know, mean boss or something like that. I mean, instead I have like 15 bosses, right? They're all my customers. I love all of them. I'd rather make customers happy and live by my own decisions than have to worry about fitting into like a corporate culture, all that stuff. Like I can't even imagine. I mean, I've worked like plugged myself into large or medium-sized companies before, and what always ends up happening inevitably, and maybe it's just the type of person I am, but I'll come up with like a solution to something, and let's say that my boss or whatever thinks that there's a different way to do it that is correct, and my way is not correct, and it's like it just seemed like a lot of times the way I was told to do something was completely incorrect. Like I'll give you an example. I had an intern. I'm not gonna say any names here. I had an internship early on. The business was already started, so it was a paid internship, and I was actually contracting with this company about 20 years ago or something like that. And my boss wanted me to take an inductor, which is a little coil of wire, and it was like the diameter on this thing was like a 1/4 inch, and he wanted this thing to talk like 6 inches away to something. I was like, basically like in my mind, bro, this thing will not talk at this, like, but the electromagnetics going on here, this is impossible. It's just impossible. But, he insisted that I keep trying it for like the rest of the 4 hours or whatever that I was assigned to like work on this thing. And it's like, no, I'm not, if something's like electromagnetically or mathematically impossible, I'm not going to do that just for the business politics of like checking the box to say that I did the task that we agreed on like 3 weeks ago. Like, things changed. We need to like be dynamic here. Let's do what's in the best interest of the company. So I was always thinking in terms of like, how do we achieve the goal? What's in the best interest of the company? And then I had all this burden on top of me, which are like people who don't care about the company. They're just getting their paycheck and going home. It's like, I can't plug into that sort of hierarchy. So that's why I'm self-employed. So if anybody else is in that position where like they're working with a team and they sort of feel these moments where it's like they're not being heard, or maybe they just really are confident in themselves forging their own path, I would encourage you to try stepping off and doing your own thing. And you could start small on the side until your side thing gets enough critical mass to where you say, okay, this is what I do. And then we do what we just talked about, which is own it. And then that's what you do. And you go all in.
Yeah, I love it. It's there, especially with anything. I have multiple thoughts here. First, in doing audio engineering, I've kind of experienced the same thing where like there's a lot of heavy lifting that I would be doing on a project, but it's like my opinion would be at the bottom of the totem pole, even though again, I'm making most of the creative decisions. I'm doing all the heavy lifting of mixing, but my opinion is still like at the bottom of that totem pole. And it always annoyed me because it was like, there's a phrase, I'm going to butcher it, but it's like rule by committee, and that like the corporate idea of the board that is completely removed from any of the work that company does is making decisions when they have, again, no context of all the players involved in what they do. And I just don't see, definitely our generation, but the generations below us, I don't see them standing for it at all.
Hell no. There's no way.
which is a good thing, because it's like, necessity is the mother of invention. And when you're faced with the reality of going into that kind of scenario or kind of forging your own path, all of a sudden, even if you're not a creative person, you come up with creative ideas to make it work. So I kind of want to know too, like what was the evolution of the shop? Okay. So the shop starts just you in an empty warehouse. How does it evolve to what it is now?
Can I roll it even back further than that?
Oh, please. Yeah, go ahead.
I think about this a lot. I would say my shop starts as a corner of the basement in my parents' house that they were nice enough to let me trash up and hoard all my stuff there. Because, like I said, I was just building stuff in 3rd, 4th grade and on the weekends and after school and stuff like that. And when I look back, that's very similar to what I do now. The only difference is it's more formalized now. Like I have an Excel spreadsheet that's the bill of materials, and those have a bunch of part numbers, and they have like manufacturer's part number and like, let's say the distributor part number and blah, blah, blah. Like, so there's a formality there for documentation's sake so that I can give my customer a deliverable, right? Like zip everything up, send it to them. When they pay, everybody's square. Even if the project doesn't go well, there's still value that was created there. Right. So that is started in, let's say, my parents' basement, evolved to in college, in my little apartment I was in, right next to my bed. I literally had my computer and circuits spilling out all over the place. And then that turned into, I was working out of my first apartment near Cleveland, Ohio. It was like in a high-rise, very small little apartment, and I couldn't make a lot of noise there, but I still had a lab in there. And then at some point, I stepped off and I said, okay, this is going to be way more professional if I'm not like rolling out of bed and rolling over to my soldering iron station. Like if I could actually drive to work. Let me take a little side tangent. I'm a big fan of having to like get up early, suffer a little bit, put like clothes on that aren't comfy, let's say go drive somewhere, to where you work, because
That's part of the process. Yeah.
100%. Because like, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to suffer if it's for me. If I have to do that because, some boss and some big companies expecting me to do that, then it's more frustrating. It's like, oh, I don't want to do this for him or her. But like, when it's yourself, you do it. You'll go the extra mile because it's only going to help you. So if I can drive to work, that clears my head, and it also sets me up for like, okay, I'm at work now. I'm not going to be folding laundry. I'm not going to be trying to play my guitar. I'm not going to be doing all these other things that are going to detract from billable time. So once I'm at work, I'm in like work mode. I would say same thing for like going to the gym or working out. I try to go at lunchtime when nobody else is in there. I drive there because I personally can't do it in my house. So maybe that's just me, but it's like, if I can drive to where I have to work, I realized early on that sets me up for like more success. And sure enough, it did. When I rented my first space, I want to say it was like $800 a month. It was a little like 1,200 square foot. It was like an industrial garage, but I think it actually just had a garage door and like a man door, but I was able to go in there, set up benches, work benches, and I was able to weld then because I couldn't weld in my apartment. Sure. I was able to do some, cut with a circular saw, and that's what opened the door to being able to do like noisy stuff, which eventually, led to, okay, now I need a bigger space. I need like a CNC machine that needs 3-phase power. So being able to have these places to go to and work just kept scaling up from there. But if you can like go to a place of work, no, you don't have to. I mean, if you have like a homestead or something and you've got like an awesome shop, I mean, go for it. That's amazing. But I think you still need to find a way to separate work from being at home and doing fun home stuff or stuff that would make you otherwise, like, I hate to use the word lazy, but stuff that's not going to get you in the game of being your best self for your customers.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I remember during COVID, like there were news reports where they're like, I know we're not going into work, but you should still wake up and put on your clothes, like pretend like you're going to work. But there is something to that. And I've always looked at, even when I am home, my studio's in my apartment, I tend to do a lot of things here, but even when I'm here, when I wake up in the morning, I've got my routine. I put on clothes that are not what I was sleeping in. I make my coffee, and then I try and adhere to the schedule. I definitely hear what you're saying about being able to go to another place, because there's always something that can distract you or needs to be handled at your home. When you physically remove yourself from that, it kind of allows you to be like, all right, well, I can't do that because I'm not physically there. I'm here now, and I have to do what I can do here.
Yeah, and 100%, I definitely want to be clear that your home is probably your best first stepping stone, and that might be where it ends for a lot of people. Because if you don't have to have the overhead of a place of business like I do, it would be pretty nice to not have to pay for this stuff and just work out of my home if I can make it work. But I would say that it's a good stepping stone, but you have to get that routine in place. Like you said, you got to make sure that nobody's going to bust in on you. And, if you are too sloppy with that dividing line, it becomes nobody takes it seriously, and then you can't take it seriously. Like, I can't have other people assuming that what I'm doing isn't important, because then they would, maybe it's just me, but like I couldn't focus enough to get a good deliverable done because I have to really be like in the zone. But that would be different if I was just making music, like on my guitar. I could probably do that from home. That'd be amazing. Well,
and even that, like I have a routine even with music. I play guitar every day. It's part of the thing. But even sometimes where I say I'm going to sit down and play guitar, it's, like I put on a YouTube video and I'm getting a little distracted, and then the dogs are barking out there. I got to go see what they're making sure they're not eating each other. And then, the doorbell rings. I got to stop and go get a package. There's all these like different opportunities to be derailed. But I'm right there with you. There has to be some kind of established routine. And if you're not in the psychological headspace to be taking it seriously, anything can kind of become a distraction. My wife, I work out at home, but even doing that, I get distracted. I can keep it contained within an hour. My wife can't do that. She has to go to a gym. It's just not the same thing when she's working out at home. But finding that balance and really kind of dialing it in. And again, this when you're waking up saying this is what I do, I'm taking it seriously. There's always just that internal flame to kind of help keep you focused even with the distractions. But to have it would be my dream to have a studio that wasn't in my house. My whole life, every place I've lived, my living space has become secondary to my studio. And I would always, if I have the opportunity to kind of ever do that, I would. There's just a delicious separation. And of course, it's like home is where I home. The shop is where I business.
Yeah.
On top of being able to have heavy machinery and like do all these cool things that it's just not safe enough to do it at the home. And there was another question too that is kind of related to this, but I think I've forgotten it.
Well, let me just add to that.
No, go ahead.
Customers. This is a big one too. Like, there's something about having a facility, however crappy it may be, when you can set up a meeting and somebody shows up at your facility and you can do a walkthrough, they, at least for what I do, they get so inspired. Like, they see stuff that they've never seen before. They see weird machinery. They're just like, their mind's blown because it's like, holy crap. Like, I was thinking in terms of, let's say, a soldering iron and a laptop and code and a 3D printer, right? But then I see like, oh, there's a CNC machine, or what's that weird thing? Well, that's a laser, or like a punch press, something that's just completely out of the realm of what they're ready to see, like something you would only think you'd see in India or China. It's like, I got one right here. So when customers see that, they get like, I think, really excited. So the same thing if you have like a studio that they can go to that's not in your home. I think that's a good goal to aspire to if you're trying to really grow. Now, I do want to say real quickly, I'm at this point in my life, I'm not trying to grow a business. Like, I'm completely 100% happy just working with my wife and having contractors that are really well qualified, because I don't want to become like a manager, an HR person to other people, making sure that they stay on task. Like, that's not my thing. So if growing a separate facility is going to lead to that, and that's not for you, then I would say don't do it. Like, keep it in your home and just take that as far as you can and keep it professional enough to where you can still potentially meet up with people and, sit down with them, show you your area that you're working in.
This is all useful information, folks. This is the stuff they're not going to teach you in school. These are the hard lessons that you're getting for free. The one thing I want to talk about here too, since we're talking about studios and you were even mentioning music and being creative, I think there's like a stigma that comes with any engineering field, but in particular like scientific engineering stuff, that it's not creative. And one of the things I always have to explain to people is like, how do you think they come up with the ideas? It's highly creative. And that's one of the things I like about your page is like you really try and reinforce the play, the experimentation, and the creative portion of it. And yes, you have an idea of what you're trying to do with all these experiments, but you're also remaining open to like in the process of an experiment, you might creatively become inspired to do something else or kind of like veer off and you intended to design this, but you ended up designing this other thing, which is just as cool. And I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to the creative component of what you do and using the creative part of your mind.
Yeah, 100%. That's what gets me in probably the most trouble with the trolls in the comments, because it's like, I'll be talking about one thing and then there'll be somebody will jump in like, well, that's not how that works. But it's people get super tunnel visioned on like the scientific method. And I'm not trying to, can I say the SH word? Like, I'm not trying I'm not trying to shit on the scientific method, but like there are processes for large bodies of collaboration. Like if you're trying to have a bunch of peers and you're collaborating, you're a big organization, you have grant money, let's say, to me, that's totally different than somebody like me who just wants to roll the dice and waste my own money on random stuff. Like, I like to be creative because it's fun. So especially with science, engineering type stuff, that's what keeps me going. That's why I'm in this, because I love to do it. I only love to do it if I can be creative. If all I could work on was like one little problem for my whole life, that I would be so bored out of my mind. And especially if that was a math problem, like, hey, you're going to calculate this thing. And maybe for some people, that's what they want to do. So go for it. But for me, and you could be creative in math, but I think you can sort of be just like an artist in any other discipline. Like if a musician wants to create new songs, my songs would be like a different spin on a thermite reaction where I'm trying to create steel with like one burn, let's say, or something crazy like that. And just exploring all these different creative twists on things is what really keeps me going. And it dovetails in perfectly with doing short form social media content, because I can just whip out the camera phone, take my B-roll, edit it together, post it up there. And that's literally what I do. So I can't, that is 100% creativity, right? Because if I have to put too much effort into something, if it takes too long and then it's going to turn into one big long thing of a video, then I might lose interest in it. So the creativity really drives what I do, and it's also what has led to having a bunch of random machines that allow me to then multiply that and make even more crazy stuff.
Yeah, get exponential with it.
Yeah.
So of the stuff that you've got on TikTok, or I mean, even of the stuff that you've experimented with in your entire time of pursuing this, what are some of the highlights? Like, obviously you have fun with every experiment that you're doing, but there's got to be some that are just like, that was really fun, or that took me in an unexpected way that I wasn't expecting it to.
I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Let's do it.
It was a turtle pissing in my face in the Allegheny National Forest when I was driving my wife and my son home. My channel has a lot of weird stuff in it. So it's mostly engineering and STEM. But as far as I'm concerned, part of STEM is like nature, right? So I absolutely love finding, this is just for entertainment purposes. I love seeing like an animal that's, walking around, like if I'm driving around at night or something, just getting like a video of that animal. Obviously not like I'm not trying to like touch a buffalo or something and get gored, but like we found this turtle and, he was crossing the road, right? So I wanted to help this thing because he didn't look like he was very motivated. So I put the flashers on, stopped. There's no traffic coming. I ran out, grabbed the turtle, took him over to like a safe spot where he could get into this drainage where he was obviously headed. And I did a video with this turtle, and I held him up to show my son, and the turtle just started like pissing in my face. I never knew this, but like a turtle, you would think, you ever held like a toad and it like freaks out and pees in your hand, there's like a couple drops. The turtle was like a man-sized piss. I'm not even kidding. Right in my face. And
that's what's in the shell. I knew it.
I never knew this, right? It literally, this is like a little, I don't know if it was like a box turtle, painted turtle. It was like this big. And it seemed like it had a bladder like the size of this beverage right here. It all came out on me. And that for some reason sticks in my mind because it's not your typical like STEM type video. So there's some of that on my channel, but that was one. One of my first videos about ball screws. I'll never forget this because I look back at it now. It's like super awkward because I just started doing the short form TikTok stuff and I was being like really formal with it and stuff. And I think that's super cringe, like watching that one, but it has a lot of good info in it. So there's like things like that.
Embrace the cringe. That's part of this process.
Well, yeah, exactly. It sticks in my mind, and I really don't care. Like I just want to like shotgun this stuff out there and see what lands. And like we said, it's fun, it's creative. Some other videos that come to mind, I would say, man, the Thermite ones keep popping up because what's so cool about that is Thermite is literally rust that you could find like on an old piece of equipment in your yard, and aluminum, which you could file down off of like a bar of aluminum. And it creates this crazy intense reaction, and it makes pure iron out of the reaction. And what's so cool about it is that it's super hot, so you could like do stuff with it, right? And there's a lot of, we won't go down we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of like Thermite has a lot of stuff associated with it in the cultural like zeitgeist that, could be controversial. But essentially, it's one of the cleanest, simplest reactions, rust and aluminum. I mean, it's not like this is some dangerous chemical that you go and buy. This is something everybody has. And there's variations on it. You could use that source of heat to make stuff. So that comes up a lot in my videos, is like having Thermite reactions. How could I tweak this to do something different? And ultimately, like, could we manufacture stuff with Thermite reactions in a decentralized way? Like when AI takes over and everybody's trying to survive on their own. Could you have Thermite in abundance and make stuff with it to sell and or trade in it.
Yeah.
There's these I think about these weird concepts of almost like post-labor economics. I'm kind of into that on the side. But so I have videos that pop up from time to time that go down that thread of Thermite. AI stuff pops up a lot because I'm into that. I was really deep into like a 3D modeling type of AI. That's kind of on pause temporarily because there's just too many people playing in that space. And I feel like I don't want to just be washed out with everybody else who's got like a computer science degree playing with AI. So
Sure.
kind of on pause. The only other stuff would be, let's see. Well, it's got to be this reactor I'm working on now, this low energy nuclear reactor. That would be the latest and greatest thing I'm working on. And that could turn into its whole entire own channel, but I think I don't want to do that. I also don't want to bore people by having too many of one type of video. So I'm still going to sprinkle in, other stuff. Like there was a porcupine the other day.
Yeah, I saw that on there. That was super fun.
I was in, actually, you're near New York City, right?
I'm right in Brooklyn. Yep.
I was north of there. I never do this stuff, but I was off-site for a project, or I was on-site for a project, like away from where I work. And I had to drive across 86 up there, southern tier, to get to where I was going, north of New York City. Mm-hmm. And I saw that critter in the Catskills. So that was a good time.
Yeah, one of the things that tripped me out even about the city when I first moved here, and I'd spent, all my family's from here, so I'd spent a lot of time here as a kid, but I never really saw much nature, and there's actually a serious raccoon problem in this town, and you don't really think about it. You think rats, yeah, it's like, or cats, like stray cats, but raccoons, they are citizens of this town, and they're debatably running it. Really, at nighttime, people don't own this city. The raccoons own this city.
I believe it because when I lived in that apartment where I had my first little shop set up, one time, it was when I first met my wife. We went out to throw something away. I think I was moving out of that place, and there was like a 40-yard dumpster where all this garbage goes, and we saw like some raccoon activity in this dumpster, right? And there was a door you had to open to throw your stuff in there. We opened it, and there was like, I'm not kidding, it was like 30 or 40 raccoons.
Raccoon party.
Because what they could do is they could just run out of there and go into this like old oak forest that was right next to a golf course next to it. And at night, like you said, like they just show up out of nowhere. So I can only imagine in New York City. I mean, I've seen the rat eating pizza, but this is probably
and again, like that is an element here, but I was completely unaware of how many raccoons. I was working a show and we had to like run the overnight, but it was in Central Park. And at like 2-3 in the morning, we were like outnumbered by raccoons. It's like the raccoons were like, "You're in our turf, and there's gonna be a gang war right now, and they're gonna win. They would have won."
I mean, limited resources. They might just try to eat you.
That's it. Look, they were licking their lips for sure, and we were for sure again outnumbered, and we had no means to defend ourselves. I definitely want to get into at least the concept and like what you're doing with LENR. But the question I had before that is, you work with a lot of like high energy, high power. And even with the thermite stuff, that's like a straight up explosive reaction. Have there been any projects where you're like scared? Like you're doing it and then something happens and you're like, I might be in a little over my head right here.
Yeah. You know what was scary was I don't have video of this because this was before I was doing the short form content, but in around 2008 or 9, I was doing a lot of water carbonation, which is why one of my businesses called Aqua Engineering is this water carbonation project had like a small CO2 canister, and these things are like 800 to 1200 psi. And I had one basically detach from the manifold, and it shot its way the whole way into the ceiling, and it like stayed up there. So that scared the shit out of me. And I one thing I got to say, this is worth touching on. If you're going to do your own thing, I think you assume all of those risks, right? And I'm perfectly happy to do it. Like I don't have to worry about somebody telling me I can't do a project. I got to wait to get some sort of like light curtain installed or authorization from this place or that place. As long as it doesn't hurt my neighbors. Right. It's just me that's at risk. And I've got, at least I grew up, I guess I'm technically a millennial, but I guess I'm kind of more Gen X. I'm like on that divide. I grew up like playing with dangerous stuff, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's like I don't get scared very easily, but I have an intuition about it. And if I do something stupid and hurt myself, that's 100% on me. I'm not trying to sue anybody. Like, it's purely my fault, and I get to deal with that. So I think that's something people should think about if they're going to go into business for themselves, is be ready to, like, again, own it. Like, it's your thing. If you want to do crazy, dangerous stuff, just be prepared. And yeah, there have been some stuff that scared me. CO2 bottle was one. On this one of the recent Thermite videos, I think it was a zirconium thermite. I went to light it up, and I'd never tried zirconium before in this mix. So I didn't know. I'm like, well, what if this is just, slight correction on the terminology. It's not really an explosion. It's a burn that's like a hot burn, but different thermites will burn at different rates. So this zirconium I'd never worked with, and I didn't know if it would, like, what if it just detonates, like literal high explosive, boom, like that thought went through my head, but yet I couldn't stop myself from putting the torch on the thermite.
Wasn't enough to deter you completely.
Right, I'll just do one of these, and quit. I had my safety glasses on, but yeah, no, that stuff is always high voltage scares me. I'm an electrical engineer, so I do not like getting shocked. I actually have a project right now that involves something that can shock, and I told the client, I was like, under no situation will I test this thing. Like, it's just not, it's not in the proposal, like, I'm not going to test it. You want me to test it? Maybe it's like $1 million. Like, some good advice is there's always a price, right? Like, if you don't want to do something, you shouldn't say, no, we're not going to do that. You should say,
well, I'll
do it for, yes, exactly. I'll do it for $800,000. No problem. It's like, okay, they're not going to go for that. So you won't have to get shocked. Right. But yeah, I don't like getting shocked. I'm super careful. If I'm ever like wiring something, I like quadruple check to make sure I'm not the path between the high voltage and ground through your hands, which is what can cook you because it goes across your heart.
Yeah.
Getting shocked, within a hand or something isn't as bad, but high voltage stuff scares me. We did have a project one time that was, I think we're past 7 years since this project. I think we're good. I can talk about this. It was a project that would cook pig waste, so pig manure, and it would make asphalt out of it. And we had to make a reactor that would pressure cook this stuff at like 4,000 PSI. And it wasn't in the budget to like get a place to test this thing. I had to just kind of, light it up in my shop and hopefully not stand too close to it. So
right.
Yeah. Luckily though, that project ran out of funding before we got to that testing. So I lucked out because I would have had to stack up sandbags or something. But yeah, there's scary things that happen, but it's not, I would say, high energy stuff. What is scary is probably nuclear type stuff because it's not my deepest area of expertise. And, I don't want to cook myself. There's been some horror stories there, but I think it's all about the amount of dose too, right? Like if you run something for a split second, you can sort of add up the flux of what's shooting out at you. And then there's a total there. So if you're not sleeping next to something that's emitting, you just blip something on to grab data and you're not right next to it, I would say maybe I'll take that risk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, again, it's just like a lot of these fields that people just assume it's calculators and people doing math, and like there's danger. There's legitimate danger involved in a lot of the stuff that I think people just completely take for granted.
Yeah, and I've heard, isn't this a thing in the music industry too, that you can have cables that'll like tickle you or shock you a little bit if they're not grounded, right?
If you're on stage performing, and whatever electrical scenario they have on stage with all that gear isn't properly grounded, you'll get shocked if your mouth touches the microphone.
Yeah.
Or like even some guitars too, if they're not wired correctly and you're running it through a high power rig, like you can feel the shock on that. I mean, even so, as somebody who is not afraid to take things apart, I would do minimal work on my gear. And I remember one time I had my head, it was like a 100 or 1,000 watt PV amplifier. And I took it apart and I was at a shop with a buddy who was a gear person. But I was just swapping out tubes, which is a very simple thing. You just kind of take the amp out of the housing and you just pop the tubes out. But I had just turned it off. and I wasn't paying attention, and I just touched the transformer, and I got zapped.
Yeah,
and my buddy was like, yeah, you should probably look out for that. And up until that point, I was completely ignorant. I was like, well, the power's off. There's nothing, but the transformer is still loaded with power. You got to like let it either drain it or let it die. And that's how I learned that. And fortunately he was there, and he was like, as soon as he saw that happen, he like pushed me away and was like, just give it a second before you start touching it again. But yeah, I mean, that's absolutely real.
Yeah, I got zapped by a helium neon laser back in the early 90s where they had a lot of laser diodes. I took the lid off this thing. They used to use these things at like grocery stores to scan your barcodes. It was a big tube laser and had, I don't know how many thousands of volts across it, but it had to jump that far to light the tube up. And it was off. Like you said, this thing had been unplugged for like a day or two. And I went in there to pull the tube out just to look at it because it looks sweet. Throwback to when I'm a kid, stuff that just looked cool and inspired me. But I ended up touching both of those electrodes, and I got the rest of that energy dumped through me. Luckily, I was fine. But yeah, inductors will store energy, capacitors. You got to worry about mechanical energy in some cases, like there's a spring that's all wound up on something. That stuff. There's actually something called a chicken stick for lasers, and it's like a resistor with two alligator clips. Something like that. And what you can do is touch everything, and it won't be a dead short. It'll go through like a high value resistor and dump it as heat. So you can touch everything with a chicken stick, and that'll protect you. And I do kind of do that all the time if I'm poking around high voltage stuff to make sure it's totally dead.
I was trying to pull up a picture of a chicken stick, and all I got was chicken on sticks.
That's going to be a tough one. Some General Tso on a stick.
I want to make sure to touch on like this might not be stuff that you mess around with, but we live in the future, right? And there's so much cool technology out there that is definitely sequestered in some like advanced scientific research lab. But I'm just wondering from your perspective as somebody who's really deep on this stuff, whether you've had access to it or not, what are some pieces of technology or pieces of equipment, scientific equipment that are out there? You do a lot of stuff with lasers, and that's like they're becoming very affordable, and they're in many things now. But like what scientific instruments or pieces of gear are like excite you about the future? For me, one of the things that, and I'm pretty sure I saw a video on here, is HARP, the microwave antenna array. And just understanding like what it can do, including making the aurora borealis. Like I think that's super cool. I think that's super cool that we have the technology that can like manipulate these like something that only the sun would be able to do. And I'm just wondering if there's any other like big scientific experiment or any large scale project that like really interests you.
Yeah, let me just rattle off a couple that come to mind. We'll touch on these rabbit holes. I like to maybe dip my toe in some conspiracy stuff, but I'm like super rooted in engineering because there's this no free lunch theorem in physics. So I believe in the no free lunch theorem, which is like, conservation of energy and all this stuff. The HARP thing, I just think it's weird that I grew up my whole life not seeing an aurora borealis in Cleveland, Ohio, right? I'd heard from my father that he saw one in like the 50s across Lake Erie. Never growing up did I see one of those. And all of a sudden there's like aurora all the time, okay? I don't know. I mean, it just seems a little weird to me, okay? Maybe there's a natural explanation for it. I'm sure there is. But apparently HARP can generate localized, ionosphere effects, right? I might be getting this a little bit wrong, but I don't know. It just seems weird to me. We know that. I'm just going to go there. I mean, we know that.
Let's do it. Yeah, safe to talk about here for sure.
You can put silver iodide to create clouds. They're doing this right now. I believe in Colorado. I just saw an article that they're doing this.
They just banned it in Tennessee.
Okay.
Yep.
It's real though. Okay. The other thing that's crazy is these hypersonic underwater torpedoes, where essentially what you do is you blow gas out of the front of whatever projectile you're shooting underwater, and it creates a cavity in front, a cavitation, and you can zip that thing through the water like faster than you ever could with a propeller without that gas bubble in the front. That's pretty crazy to me. The other thing that's crazy is any sort of phased array of anything, this is super interesting, because if you were to take a bunch of little elements of something that all have their own little fields going out there, and you put them in phase, you can all of a sudden steer and direct a beam based on that array, right? This is, I believe, how cell phone towers can sort of triangulate and know that this person needs more bandwidth for their signal, right? It can sort of listen and then point more bandwidth to you. You can use that in directed energy weapons for like crowd dispersion. They have like ways to, again, phase stuff. What that does is basically all those little wave fronts can be mathematically designed to overlap in a way that you have constructive interference where you want it and destructive interference in the other zones. So that's all just electrical engineering, right? And that's like time domain into frequency domain type stuff. And that's a whole thing, which is signal processing, that if you really want to go down a fun rabbit hole, check out any sort of introductory course to signals and systems that would be electrical engineering coursework, because it's super hard and annoying math, to be honest. But if you think in terms of what could be done with signal processing, and then you look at all the advanced tech that's out there, however advanced you think it is, and now you think in terms of signal processing and frequency domain, it can get even more advanced. An example would be anytime there's a cusp or an edge case, I'm thinking in calculus, when you have like a discontinuous graph, weird stuff happens when mathematical equations go to infinity or go to zero. And they call those poles and zeros. And this is real mathematical stuff that if you can get it to happen with, let's say, an inductor and a capacitor, or, a low energy nuclear reaction, you can get weird stuff to happen, because you're now at a point where your common knowledge that was rooted in some 0 to 100 or 0 to 1,000, all of a sudden you go to infinity. Now there's, reasons it won't get to infinity because there's losses and things like that. And I'm speaking generally, but that's where you want to exploit things and push that boundary of technology, where things go to infinity or zero.
Well, I love all of those things that you mentioned. I feel the weather modification thing is something I've been trying to explain to people, and like the history on that now is like super dense. GE had engineers that were developing that in the 40s. That's something that we've known how to do for a long time, and that alone is just an interesting thing. In Nebraska, where I'm from, that you can order it. You can order it. You can order planes to in case your crop needs water. Like this, it's like there are some real tangible use cases here, but then that opens up to a whole different other line of stuff. Even with HARP, I'm pretty sure HARP's a phased array.
Sounds right.
I want to say, and from my understanding of that, it's like the reason that it can stimulate the aurora borealis is because when you're beaming that much energy up into the atmosphere, there's fluorescent particles that they just get warmed up, neon and stuff, and it makes the aurora borealis in the same way that the sun does when it blasts us with radiation. So there's like the scary thing about what is the malicious intent, like what are these things being used for? But I'm kind of the same way with you, where like I love the technology, and I regardless of who might be using it for what nefarious means, it doesn't negate that the technology is cool and that humans were able to develop it, and refine it in a way that what they could do is repeatable. Another one, this is like almost completely conspiracy tangent, but one of the guests I had on here worked at the South Pole Station. And one of the things they have down there is the iceberg neutrino detector. Are you aware of that thing?
Yeah, I'm familiar with a couple of these different ones. Yeah.
And it's super, and that's just one of these crazy pieces of science that they have there. The iceberg neutrino detector has these DOMs, which are just like these metal spheres, and they're just embedded all the way down in the ice, and it creates an array. Okay. And supposedly what that does is it just it detects neutrinos coming to Earth from out in outer space. I don't know. It's like from stars exploding, or there's like something where that releases neutrinos, and that's why we have it, and it's measuring it. But that's always what interests me. It's the same thing with like I think we were talking about this in the pre-call, but like the B-2 Spirit Bomber, that brings death. That's all that thing is for. But I still can't help but think the engineering is incredible. I can't, like, just the fact that we are able to come up with such a unique airframe design and have it be repeatably flyable safely, that's incredible to me. Even, the SR-71, one of my favorite aspects of that thing is when it's on the ground, it's leaking gasoline. But when it gets up into the sky, super high up, and it gets superheated, the airframe expands and closes the gaps.
It's crazy.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Even the torpedo thing, underwater, there's a particular mechanism they use, but in the sky, they employ that same thing on proposed designs for hypersonic missiles, where there's a laser that shoots out in front and creates that bubble in air so that there's less resistance for the thing to move even faster. I can't help but think that's cool, regardless of how nefarious the intent of use of that thing is,
Yeah, let's touch on that a second. I do remember you mentioning that when we had our pre-call. We did talk about that. Have you seen the guy that's doing the like AI powered balloon shooter? It's like an AR style mounted on like a gantry type thing, and he's shooting balloons. But they don't have to be balloons.
No. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
It's I'm going to pull it up just so that people can see what we're talking about. I got caught on this guy's page too.
Boy, do I have a tangent here to go down.
Yeah, no, let's hear it.
No shade against this guy. I can't blame another creative engineer type for doing something that they think is cool. I really can't. Let me put it this way. How do I say this? I have family that are in the military. My whole family are hunters. I'm a hunter. I fish too. But at this point in my life, I would say, I don't know, maybe it's just perspective, but I used to get so excited about, like, the one thing I wanted to do in college was design guided missiles. I wanted to literally design weapons for the government. I just thought that was cool, because I grew up, shooting cap guns and stuff, right? I thought that was sweet. Well, and I even did some research projects at Penn State on missile guidance, and I have like some prototype stuff in the back that's kind of cool.
Sick.
Show some other time. But anyway, I think this wasn't that long ago. This was like a couple years ago. A colleague of mine who was a client, but I really respect him. We touch base every once in a while, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on this project. It's this thing that's not working out. You might want to get involved in this, whatever." And then he said, like, the other thing he passed on was this like anti-personnel project, and he's like, "Nah, I just passed. I didn't want to do it." And I'm like, "Why did you want to do that?" He's like, "Well, just like ethically, he didn't want to do it." And this is like the first time in my life that somebody who's like a peer at my like engineering level said, "That's not cool. I don't want to do it." And that was like, I was like floored. I was like, "Oh man, like, you mean it's not cool to just design stuff to kill people?" Like, for some reason, I never crossed that bridge where I really thought about the consequences of what that, the knowledge that human brain power and creativity does. It's like, you remember the Terminator line where Sarah Connor's like, "Men like you built the hydrogen bomb." Like, I used to think that was so cheesy. I'm like, oh yeah, well, Miles Dyson's cool because he invented this Terminator, But like now it's kind of like, I see what she was saying, right? So bro who's making the gantry mounted gun, like, let me just say, it's again, respect, because he's being creative, but it's not that hard to ask AI how to mount a bunch of closed loop servos onto a gantry with a bunch of ball bearings and have it home in on something using, let's say, OpenCV, camera system, Raspberry Pi, and Arduino. And, some people out there could get something like that working over a couple weekends. So to me, I'm not as impressed. I realize that it's like, it's going to get likes and things like that because it looks cool, and it's like, holy shit, you can make stuff, have a gun mounted on there and have it auto zoom in and shoot at something. Well, yes, of course. I mean, we've been able to do that since like
for a while,
a long time. So when I see that that's where the excitement goes and stuff, I feel like I just want to let it be known that like it's cool, but it's not cool. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to shit on somebody if they're doing that. Just think for a second that maybe there's other ways you could use your brain to advance humanity, right? So I'm sort of in the mind nowadays where it's like I get less of a kick out of that stuff. But like you said, I think the pure engineering is cool. So like if there's a plane that's going to shoot lasers out and go through the air silently or faster, or if there's a better way to target like a bullet, that's still, I can appreciate that there is a weird way that still advances civilization, even though I don't just nerd out or like get off on the fact that how cool it is as destructive, right? Because I mean, we reached the pinnacle of destruction in World War II.
Right.
So
now it's just a matter of degree, I guess,
So I'm more impressed now, like when I see some dude flint napping a point and, he goes and hunts something with, whatever. Like it's the technology, I guess maybe because I've been in technology for so long that I'm not really impressed by stuff that's destructive. To me, it's like, can you solve the energy problem? Or like, can you find a way, like figure out what these alien drones are, like quantify that somehow and let us know. Are these things otherworldly? Is it just like this weird consciousness thing? Is it just BS, a social media zeitgeist, and nobody's actually seeing anything that's an alien? Like that type of stuff is more interesting to me now than finding ways to mount guns on servos and shoot at stuff and pretend that you're not actually inventing.
What this, right? What this is going to get. Well, and like I often straddle that line too, and I always have to remind myself that sadly there's no money in peace. There's money in war, and the people develop this shit because governments are paying them millions of dollars to develop it, and for every crazy, insane device that destroys, we might get a piece of technology that benefits humanity.
Yeah.
But I can't help but wonder, what if we had just spent that money on something that just benefited humanity and didn't risk destroying it?
I mean, and look, the flip side is I'm 100% realist in this, that there is no way we would be where we're at today without World War II. Like 100%. If you look at what happened in Germany, there's no way we'd have what we have without Germany and World War II. As evil as they were and as awful as that was,
we took all their good stuff.
Nylon, like rockets. I mean, you go on and on and on. Kevlar, I think, anabolic steroids. You go on and on and on. And it's like all of these things were invented in a time of war because that's the only time people put their thinking caps on and get out of bed earlier because they're trying to save themselves, right?
Yeah.
So you get this super innovation. And that's how nature works too. When you have like evolution of insects, right? It's this arms race, evolutionary arms race that keeps ratcheting up. So I can definitely appreciate it. It's awful, and I'm not a fan of that way that it arrives at, but I don't think we'd get anywhere if we just said, hey, the right thing to do is spend money on this thing that'll benefit people, because you're just not going to get enough excited people putting in the extra time and effort to figure stuff out. So that's the unfortunate duality we live in, and I'm a realist about it. I just think if somebody's going to get their views by building like destructive weapons on short form media, I just feel like there's something better you could do with your time. That's kind of it. It's like.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. I kind of feel the same way about 3D printing, and people, like, the first thing people are trying to do is make untraceable guns. And it's like, guys, we have a thing that can create anything, and that's what we're going to try and do.
This is why we can't have nice things, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like, fine, do it. Don't tell anybody about it. Like, just
don't make a video about it and explain.
Yeah. So, and I've been almost involved with some people in that industry too. And, there's just so many. I mean, I'm still going to work with people that invent that stuff because, let's be honest, if we didn't have a military, I mean, even though we have oceans protecting us here in the United States,
sure,
I'm sure somebody would eventually march in, and then we would just relearn all this stuff all over again. So, like, we have to have a strong military. We have to have weapons of war. Like, we have to be able to protect ourselves too. My house was robbed when I was 17. First thing I did was search the place with a weapon, right? I didn't think to call 911. I was just like, I got to make sure nobody's in my house, because what if they kill me?
Yeah.
So, like, there's things like that I'm rooted in that are, like, very controversial to some people, but I like to be realistic about it, that, like, it is what it is. And, man, let's just try to sand off the rough edges. Like, let's try to not glorify that stuff, and let's try to, like, live our own lives and try to put, if we're doing something creative that's involving STEM, let's try to create something that's going to advance humanity and make all of our lives easier, more fun. That's just where I'm at on that stuff, is like, it's still cool. People still send me videos of, like, an A10 just mangling something. Like, I still think that's cool, but it's like, that's not the things I want to work on that really excite me anymore.
Well, I mean, this might be the perfect segue to start talking about the LENR, and especially now when, you know, we talk about all the different energy crises that this country and other countries have, and our energy dependency on certain things or certain countries, and even in a more prosaic way, the amount of money we have to spend on our damn electric bills anymore, while the companies that are giving us the electricity just continue to make record profits. And actually, I think this was the video that Andrew tagged me in. It was maybe the first or second video you had with the LENR. So I kind of want you to just briefly explain what the concept for this thing is, where you came up with this idea, and in terms of like something ethical for humanity, I really can't think of anything that would benefit us more now than reliable, small form, deployable energy alternatives to supplement green energy. Like, you know, it's not just going to be solar panels. It's not just going to be wind farms. It's going to have to be an amalgamation of much safer and less destructive utilities working together in a way that is completely regenerative instead of degenerative. But yeah, definitely get into this to the point that you can, and this is super exciting stuff. I'm going to pull up the videos too, so people can kind of see which ones to check out. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think we got 1 through 10 as of our recording right now, and
that's what it looks
what I'm
like.
doing here is LENR stands for low energy nuclear reactions. And, you know, at one time I was considering going into nuclear engineering or chemical engineering or electrical engineering. And I picked electrical engineering because I didn't know which sidewalk to pick. I was like, I didn't know I was going to be asked this, like which degree to pursue. So I picked electrical because I was like, this can be a foundation for everything. So let's just put this right on the table. The term cold fusion is essentially what this is, and it's supposedly been debunked so many times. But what's interesting about it is that what I've sort of found is that the debunking is more procedural debunking, where it's like, oh, this scientist, you know, used one of their grad students, which, you know, wasn't an independent third party to verify the work and stuff. So there's a lot of like procedural stuff that I see in the history of why these things have been debunked. But as far as like the actual evidence that you could take nickel or palladium, for example, and load it with hydrogen, and it will have anomalous heating. These are like facts. And if I'm wrong about this, I need to be corrected as soon as possible. Like, let me know why this stuff's wrong, because this stuff's out there. You can Google LENR, LENR. You can Google sonoluminescence. You know, there's a whole bunch of projects out there that they've done, and there's data that prove that there's this anomalous heating. One, I believe it's called Fleischmann and Pons from the 80s. They essentially had nickel inside of an environment that had hydrogen in it, and there was anomalous heating in there. I believe it may have been a biological experiment they were doing. I could be wrong on that. But the anomalous heating, it's like, okay, why is this anomalous heating happening? Is it that they just don't know how to take their measurements? Well, no, it's actually that there is anomalous heating from the data that's out there. And it seems like when you have a metal lattice, like let's say nickel, and you have hydrogen which loads into there. So hydrogen can sneak its way into the lattice because it's smaller than the nickel atoms, like the regions where they're at. There's like vacancies, there's little cracks, there's things like that. Hydrogen can get in there, and when it loads up in there, which, quick side tangent, this is why the hydrogen economy has a problem with tanks becoming embrittled, because essentially hydrogen gets into these tanks.
Gotcha.
And eventually they get brittle and they blow up.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is you can't just store compressed hydrogen without it intruding into all the metal. This is kind of like gallium intruding into aluminum, which is a whole other thing. Like certain elements have a way to intrude the metal lattices. So what happens here is when you have a metal lattice that is intruded with all of these hydrogen atoms, all of a sudden there's this thing called the Coulomb barrier, right? Like you can't get two atoms close enough to fuse because you have to overcome this Coulomb barrier. And that's where you get these numbers like you need like 1 billion Kelvin or something, you know, like some hotter than the sun and blah, blah, blah. And that's why we don't see iron. And that's why the whole thing about like where elements come from, that's all true science. That's all 100% correct. It's been, you know, that's the way it is. But this goes back to poles and zeros, there are times when these nice, clean mathematical formulas and geometries get thrown out the window. And that's when you have hydrogen loaded into like a lattice, let's say. There's these things that happen called like screening, for example. That lattice can squeeze stuff in different ways when you pass energy through it. So if you were to run electrons through there, or you squeeze it really hard, let's say, you can get stuff that squishes, and then those hydrogen atoms have no place to go. And for some weird reason, sometimes they either tunnel, or they overcome that Coulomb force, or the Coulomb force goes way down, and then they fuse. Okay, and this is what, as far as I can read, has been validated that this does happen. Problem is they don't know the mechanism for it, and it doesn't happen all the time. It's sort of a rare thing. So what I did is I took that knowledge nugget and I said, okay, let me just start thinking of like, if this happens at room temperature, I'm never going to get to, 100 million Kelvin, like in my lab with anything. But could I take something that happens at, let's say, room temperature or a couple hundred degrees, and can I bump that up to like 10,000 degrees or like 100,000 degrees maybe? And then we've all of a sudden have like this huge force multiplier on something that normally happens at only a few hundred degrees. So what I came up with is, and I since found out that this has been attempted before too, using sonoluminescence to crush down a bubble. And what I'm not trying to do is just fuse like heavy water, right, into its fusion products. I'm trying to actually put a nickel lattice into the sonoluminescence region that is intruded with hydrogen and squeeze that. And I think that's where I get a lot of hate in the comments on my TikTok videos and stuff, is that I think people miss the fact that I'm trying to squeeze a nickel lattice that's hydrogen loaded. And that's a lot different than just trying to squeeze D2O, for example. So weird things happen when you have a metal lattice with hydrogen in there because it has no place to go. So you end up like, it's like if you took a bunch of magnets that were repelled and you can't stick them together. But if you were to clamp them down somehow and then squeeze on it, all of a sudden you can like hold them better, or like weird things happen. The other thing I'll say to that is, going back to poles and zeros, let's say that you have a certain frequency that you're smacking that lattice with. You end up with harmonics and other things that happen when you start having a frequency. And what that can do is push things out of the forces that are normally present in a steady state. So you start having things like, they do this with amplifiers, right? If you have an amplifier that's resonant at a certain frequency, it could be it passes maybe just that frequency. You can do the same thing essentially with this lattice. And that's where I want to play and experiment.
So I'm wondering too if you can like talk a little bit about like the design, because that's what I've loved about watching this, is like, it's one thing to speak on, okay, I have this idea, but you're actually putting the things together, and that's part of the videos on TikTok. It's like we're getting to see this stuff happen in real time, and it's so cool. So just speak a little bit to taking this from an idea in your head to a design, and then tangibly starting to manufacture the components.
Yeah, so the goal is that we can sort of all learn together, and then this can be an open source project. And what that means, for those who don't know, is that all of the files, I'd like to achieve sonoluminescence first, but once I get there and things are somewhat working, I'm going to put all those files on like a GitHub repo or somewhere where it's open source. That means anybody could download these files. You could have this part machined, let's say, have this part machined, this part, right? You can buy this. This happens to be just an ultrasonic cleaner transducer. You can get these on eBay for like $30. So the idea is that there's two hemispheres, right? Hemisphere is a half of a sphere. You put those together, and then you take two ultrasonic cleaner horns, and this thing's going to resonate and squeeze, and in the very center there should be a sonoluminescent bubble, which you would be able to see through this little, there's going to be a little tiny crack there, right? And a little hole. And that bubble should be right in the center of that. And the idea there is that we can see the bubble. We could measure if there's neutrons coming off it. We could measure if there's gamma rays coming off it. We could put a cloud chamber next to it, trying to do this on like a poor person budget, right? So that we could bootstrap it so that anybody could reproduce this data. And I don't think it makes sense to have like $100,000 worth of neutron detectors next to it if you want this to be repeatable work that anybody could duplicate. So what I'd like to do is simply get a Raspberry Pi with temperature logging going and measure, just chase the data. So basically run it without any reactants in it, like just water, see how it heats up, make a curve of that. Then let's say we add, nickel nano powder that's just nickel. Run a curve of that, see what the heating does. Let's say we run heavy water with nickel, see what that does. Maybe it becomes a metal hydride, which is nickel with hydrogen already in it, like what they use in a nickel metal hydride battery, right? Put that in there in a colloidal suspension, run it. Like just start running these things so we essentially have an ecosystem of colloidal suspensions or wires, things that we could run. Anybody could run this, get the Excel data, share it, and we can all sort of chase this down once I get this thing started and kicked off. And we could figure out if this even works at all. If it does work, what's the one that works the best? And then once that works, how do we array this thing up so that everybody could have one of these on their property and get their own power? And that's where maybe I disappear, like I don't know.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'll
we never hear from you again.
I'll try not to, but the thing is that, as far as I know, this is all legal. Like I can put this out there as an open source project and then let it grow tentacles and go where it wants to go, right? Because this is just, at the end of the day, this is a sonoluminescent design for just creating sonoluminescence. Turning it into a reactor would be what you're putting in it. It's also possible, too, that sonoluminescence itself could be used for just totally other random things. Like, maybe there's some candy you could create by putting the right sugar and stuff in here, and then that pressure turns into something, right? Like, to me, it's a tool that is a way to crush a volume into an infinitesimal, again, poles and zeros going to infinity or zero, where cool and weird stuff happens. If this tool is available for everybody to essentially crush bubbles into super hot, dense little things without having to use a vacuum chamber, without having to have like a turbomolecular pump,
right?
All of the tokamak reactors and stuff all rely on a vacuum, right? Which gets super expensive right out of the gates. Something like this relies on a fluid and easily accessible parts that anybody could use, and that mass squishes together. When you have that cavitation and the bubble slams back down, you get these like unbelievable temperatures and pressures. And that's, again, something you should look up if you're interested in the rabbit hole, is sonoluminescence. But to me, it's a tool that should be open sourced, and anybody could hopefully duplicate whatever results I get from it. And it might be nothing. It might be absolutely nothing, which who cares? Be fun.
Well, I mean, that's the point of an experiment.
Yeah.
That is literally the point of an experiment. Is this hypothesis worth advancing? And I think the thing that excites me so much about what you're doing with this is like, this is all accessible stuff. You don't have to be in some classified lab and have some crazy clearance to get a hold of any of these things. It's almost similar to what you were trying to experiment with Thermite. And I can't remember the exact term you used, but post-apocalyptic. Well, it was post-apocalyptic trade, or there was a phrase that you used.
It's post-labor economics. Like,
there we go.
Yeah, there's once AI supposedly creates this abundance, everybody gets a UBI check, and we have nothing to do.
What do we do?
Right? So, and are we going to be having to sip a grasshopper milkshake to get our UBI check? Like, we don't know, right? So you might get like universal basic income, but how good is that quality of life? It might be so shitty that if you're good living on that, fine, do your drugs or whatever you're going to do just to get through the day. But like those of us who want to still be creative and do stuff, open source projects like this could give us a way to keep pushing the boundaries of like energy generation. And the thing about AI too, real quick, is AI is a complete power hog. So as AI scales up, we're going to need more and more and more power. This is why they've brought back online nuclear power plants that were shuttered for decades. It's like, oh, we need this data center. Okay, turn it back on. We couldn't do that for 40 years. All of a sudden we can. So I think there's definitely, now's the time to really dive into energy. And this is something that was always in the back of my mind, but I just thought I just never thought it would be accessible because, again, the cost of vacuum chambers and the way it's normally done with high vacuum physics, Some of those systems, you can't even get a fingerprint inside the high vacuum chamber. It'll continue to off gas, and you won't get to the point where you can even get to your vacuum. And then if you turn the wrong sensor on too early, it'll burn that $10,000 sensor out. So it's like, this is not how normal people get to play with physics.
Right.
The way normal people get to play with physics is by putting water in something, turning on 2 ultrasonic transducers, and hammering this thing and getting your 10,000 Kelvin or whatever. So it's sort of like I wanted to start with first principles, and sort of this is how I handle like prototyping too, is like, what's immediately off limits? I think anything that's super unsafe is off limits. So if this can use nickel instead of like some crazy uranium or something, let's use nickel, right? Totally safe. If it can use water, totally safe. Let's start there. I know, like, for example, palladium does a better job with hydrogen loading and more anomalous heating than nickel. Well, palladium's like thousands of dollars for a little 100-gram nano powder from, Sigma Aldrich, wherever. That's off limits. Like, yeah, it'd be great. If you want to send me some palladium, I'll run it. Like, that's great. But I wouldn't expect people to duplicate this open source project and have to buy palladium or have to buy $100,000 worth of sensors. This should be like, let's say under $1,000, and you can run this thing, take the data, put it into Excel, share it.
Dude, I love it because I have wondered this for a long time. Why did we stop at nuclear? Like, why was that the pinnacle? Why did we just assume that a leaking nuclear reactor, that a poorly maintained building that's leaking radiation, why is that the best option? And I mean, we could go down an entire tangent for that.
Yeah, that elephant foot's still burning.
yeah, exactly right. And I just I have just been convinced for a long time that not only do other options exist, but then we kind of go back to what I was saying before, where it's like, I'm sure there have been moments in the past where we've come to like these alternate timelines or alternate branches of energy, but the money wasn't in it, or the people that were trying to develop the thing couldn't get the money because there was no like military application for it,
or they couldn't write the grant in a way that convinced their school to get the grant money, right? Or like I said, procedural stuff. The grad student was in on it and he shouldn't have been, because it should have been another school, but they couldn't do it. It's like, to me, that does not debunk anything. That might make it dubious or like cast doubt. But if you're just some dude, guy or girl who wants to play with this stuff, it's your own money. You go play with it. You know what I mean? Like, that's how we push the frontiers, I think.
It's another reason why I love your content. You just make a lot of this. You make it accessible, and you explain why it's accessible. And this is, when I was growing up, being smart wasn't cool. And I feel like, it's like you nerd, you get beat up for being too smart. And anymore, when you look at the frailty of our existence on this planet, we have to just get over that. Being smart is cool. Being smart is what propels all the cool stuff that we have in this society. And finding creative ways to use stuff that we have ready access to, that exists in abundance already, and repurpose it in a way. Like, I would love to see on the side of every house one of these things. And there's the other thing, is like, this thing doesn't need to create a nuclear facility's worth of energy. Just needs to create, if it can create any energy, that's a win.
Yeah, what do you need?
That's a win.
200 amp service at 120 volts for a house, or 220 volts for a house. Like, yeah, I mean, maybe it takes, let's say it even takes 100 of these things, right? And you array them together. And then you have to give it some sort of power to kick off the reaction. Okay, you array it up, and maybe there's a way. I mean, literally, like, I'm pretty sure, like 99% sure it's a complete joke, but like, you've heard of the Enron egg, right?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's hilarious.
Like, when I first saw that, this is how my brain works as an engineer, is like, I don't immediately assume anything fake, because it's like, why couldn't you? Like, let's say that there's something called a nuclear diamond battery, right? Now, granted, it's tiny and it's on like a semiconductor. And let's say you run a real-time clock in deep sleep mode for a month on it or something. Well, what if you put 100,000 of those in an egg, and maybe it generates 200 amp service because you got a little inverter in there? Okay, maybe it's $500,000. Okay, but get a loan and amortize it over 30 years or something. I don't know. Like, to me, it wasn't immediately fake. It was like probably fake because I just don't know that a company could pull that off in that form factor yet. But let me not immediately rule it out. Let me just look into it. And okay, sure, it's a joke, right? But essentially something like this, if it were to work, maybe it's not an egg. Maybe this is a whole Connex box trailer that lives in your backyard. But if it could get you the power you need, and let's say it's not cost prohibitive, and all it's doing is turning nickel into copper, which are two completely safe things. Man, that sounds good to me.
That's a huge win.
Yeah.
I know the deployable nuclear reactors. There's a bunch of stuff that we developed to power satellites and other advanced scientific equipment and weapons in space. But I know Rolls-Royce last year they revealed they're going to have like a small enough, a micro reactor, but one of the proposed ideas for that is you can have it power your house. And the first thing I can think is, why the hell would you want a nuclear reactor in your backyard? There has to be more options. There has to be a more creative way to use the safe things, like you're saying, safe materials that we have already in abundance, to benefit us in a truly ethical and human way. And it's just really cool. It's been really cool watching this idea literally come out of your head and it's starting to take shape. And I guess the next question would be there is like, so let's say you do get this thing to generate any amount of power. What would be like the next plateau, or like in terms of testing, what would be the next scale up from what you're doing right now?
Yeah, let me walk you through that. So what I'd like to do is first just get to sonoluminescence. This has nothing to do with LENR really or anything nuclear. This would just be a sonoluminescent bubble, which means that we have a stable single bubble in the center that produces light, right? And that light is coming from, they don't really know for sure, but it's like superheated collision of stuff. You can actually see this demonstrated if you ever watch the slow motion, like bullet going through ballistic gel. When the gel claps back together, sometimes there's a flash in there.
You told me that, and I've watched a million of those videos.
Yeah,
and I was like, no way. And then I watched one after the fact, and I was like, there it is.
You see
it?
Oh
my! I can't believe I missed that. I'm watching a million of these things.
Yeah. Shout out to like Demolition Ranch or whoever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So no, but that's what happens. It slams back together and it makes this superheated little thing. So, what I'd like to do is first get to sonoluminescence and get the design documented, because there's some problems we have to solve. Like, we have to make sure that this hemisphere and the way that the horn's designed and everything is going to dump as much of the, basically couple the acoustics from this piezo stack through there.
Yeah.
It's almost like pushing a child on a swing, right? If you push them and you just punch them when they come back, they're not gonna have an enjoyable swing, right? You have to push at just the right time, and that's how you build amplitude. Same thing with resonance in a piezo element. This has to transfer through that and then go into the water. So there's a lot of things. I don't want to oversimplify or trivialize the challenges still. So this might turn into LENR Part 900 before we even get to sonoluminescence. But I think if we can at least get this thing running, what I can do is maybe I can solve that with signal processing rather than remachining these every time I want to change something. And there could be ways to tune this too. So we get to sonoluminescence, I'll open source the stuff, put it out there. Then we start running colloidal suspensions, right? So that would be, I would want to run nickel powder. So that would be a nano powder, like basically the finest nickel you can buy powder on eBay, let's say. The other one would be basically just running whatever we can put in this thing. And that's where I think it gets really fun, because there could be just unlimited test runs. What can we put in this thing and run it that at least rooted in the science of, okay, we're going to have a metal lattice with hydrogen intrusion that gets squeezed and screened in there, right? We could add magnetic fields. We could add high voltage to the center. You could add lasers potentially. There's a lot of stuff we could do. And again, it's probably not to get to the heat of fusion that you'd get in like a tokamak reactor, but it would be taking something that could be a low energy fusion that happens at only a couple hundred degrees and then bumping that up to 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 degrees, right? So that to me is like the goal here. And then that would be the next step, is just starting to log that data. And the data is going to be spreadsheets, literally with graphs, like plots in Excel, nothing more than that. Video wise, it's going to be, whatever cool shots I can take. I'm not like an audio video snob, so you're going to get pretty poor quality video out of this. It's just whatever my iPhone can film. But I do have like a Nikon camera with like a little bit better lens. I'll probably zoom right in on the little sonoluminescent area that's like right in the center, so that we could get like a good close up. I was thinking too, potentially putting like a Edmund Optics type of lens assembly integrated into the manifold with a little Raspberry Pi camera, so I could actually start triggering photos. It wouldn't be a high-speed camera, but I could at least grab shots at maybe a certain trigger point. And actually, because it's acoustic, if you run that enough, you can reconstruct that to look like a slow-mo. Stuff like that. That's sort of where I see this going. So ratcheting it up one win at a time, and then dispersing it out there so it's open source.
Well, dude, watching your videos and even getting to talk to you now, like, you just have such a passion, and I can clearly see like how excited you are about these things. It's one of my favorite things about your content is that it just draws you in. Like, even if you don't have an advanced understanding or general understanding of most of the stuff you're talking about, you just make it accessible. And I cannot recommend it enough to anyone who's into science and engineering. You just do a bunch of cool things. And even I watched one video where you're just cutting sheet metal for Etsy.
Yeah.
But even just like using that machine and just this is just another thing that I'm doing here. I'm using my skills and my knowledge of the technology to generate some money for myself and experiment and it's just, I don't know. It's super cool. I really cannot wait to see what happens with the LENR. Like, we'll definitely have to do another episode once you've got to like the experimental stage.
Yep.
And then depending on how advanced it gets, I might have to just come out there and see it myself.
Yeah,
but,
we'll do a featuring type of we'll do some videos.
It'd be so sick. I would really like. It really excites me that you're doing this. And what's the silliest part about this is like, big science labs should be doing this, but it's going to take a guy in his shop to actually do this stuff. And that, to be honest with you, that's really what it should be taking. And that's really the only way we can hope that there's some ethics behind it.
Yeah.
For all the previous reasons that we discussed, that there's like a human element to a lot of science that just kind of gets glazed over, like science for the sake of science, and we just forget, like, we do science so it can benefit humanity. That's why we do the science. It's not so that we can advance some AI overlord. Yeah. It's so that we can, life can be made easier or better or in some way combat the elements that are beyond our control, Yeah,
let me touch on something you said there, because I've got a good anecdotal contribution to that thought. So, yes, okay, I see this in prototyping all the time, where I have customers that are everything from a napkin sketch, somebody who's like, trying to max out their credit card because they think they're going to be on a beach the rest of their life when their invention makes it, to like huge companies that are operating off of a grant, let's say. What I've found is that the smaller, scrappier teams that are getting a prototype done, that are very flexible in how it's done and all that, they get a much better result than, let's say, the worst I've experienced are like education, right? Or like if there's a school that has grant money and they're spending it, it seems like the bigger the bloat in the organization you get, the less innovation can happen for a given amount of capital.
Yeah.
So it's just less dynamic. And like what ends up happening is things get so stale that everything becomes just, there's no room to play. There's no blue sky R&D anymore. It's kind of like everything is so wasteful that those customers end up with huge bills and they don't have a lot to show for it at the end of the project. And they're not even upset about it. It's like, those projects don't go very well. So if you think about it, aside from like a Skunk Works or something like that, government lab, which I don't even know what happens there. But if you're looking at big organizations that have to spend grant money to do stuff, things are going to inch along. And then sort of what I said earlier is like, you're going to have a lot of procedural falsifications where it's like, this is bogus or this is dubious or fake because you didn't check this box, this box, this box. But it's like, this is what YouTube has done for us, is like, it's unleashed all of these creators that just cut to the chase and show you how something's done for free. Like any one of you can go on a computer, watch a YouTube video, and come completely up to speed with where I'm at on this stuff just by going down these rabbit holes. And then add into that AI, right? Like just use ChatGPT 4.0, let's say, right? I'm not even a fan of the other stuff on top of that, but just 4.0. You start going down rabbit holes with that. Ask it stuff. Ask it how to make a sonoluminescent nuclear reactor, right? It'll tell you. And no, it might not be right, but what you do is then you Google everything that's in there, right? And then you re-feed it back to ChatGPT, and you keep asking it, and you keep reformulating this stuff till you completely get your thought out there, and you've completely searched for what you're searching for in your little rabbit hole. And I think if everybody does that, and everybody could come up with their own way to be self-employed, their own inventions, their own stuff, and it just seems like that's the way things are going to go when knowledge is decentralized because of AI. So essentially AI is lurking in all this. Like that is going to decentralize knowledge. Everybody's going to be able to know everything at some point. And then what do you do with that knowledge? So there's no need to keep that stuff locked up in slow-moving grant money. We can innovate our way to wherever we need to go just collectively, like grassroots, in my opinion.
Well, dude, I love that. I really want to thank you for coming on the show and like,
really?
and just like, again, conveying your love and passion for this stuff and inspiring other people. You definitely inspired me. I just want to turn this over to you to any last words of inspiration for people who are maybe on the fence about pursuing any of the things that we've talked about, or a career trajectory that's similar to yours. Any words of advice or encouragement?
Yeah, if I had to boil it down to one thing, don't let math discourage you, because like math for me was no fun. I'm not very good at math. It was, let me say that I graduated down to my last drop credit with an extra year and an extra summer, and the math is pretty much what caused me to almost not get my degree. But even if you're not pursuing a degree and you just want to get into this stuff, don't even worry about the math. Like, maybe check out 3 Blue 1 Brown on YouTube and try to absorb some of his math topics, just so you can, if you can understand mathematics at a conceptual level, again, going back to what is a pole and a zero. If you know that weird stuff happens as your system goes to infinity or as it goes to zero, then you can exploit those limits and you can do the exciting push the limits of science stuff when stuff goes to zero or infinity. So I would say don't worry about the nuts and bolts of having math be a challenge to you. Get your hands dirty, do this stuff anyway, do your own experiments. If it's not even STEM related, let's say it's just art, you're writing music or something like that, I would say back to what we said about take your job seriously. If that's what you want to do and start your own thing, just live it like day and night, make that your thing. Like don't have any hesitation, because people will smell that hesitation on you and then you'll be like somebody who's not serious about it. So just go for the thing, and even if you have to start it on the side and do it slowly, at least take it seriously, and at some point you can hopefully step off and make that your thing. So don't live your life in a miserable job working for somebody you don't want to work for. I know this is easier said than done, but like there is another way to do it. I'm doing it that other way. And I think basically what you said is like, we might all be, not all of us, a lot of us might be doing it that other way when there's less and less jobs as we move forward and as AI takes over stuff. So my channel talks a lot about just how to AI proof yourself. And that's sort of the basis for everything I do, is like inspire people to try the thing, try to do your own things, but don't let the math slow you down if you're going into STEM. That's what I got to say about that.
I love that. You heard it here, folks. Pursue your dreams, pursue your passions. And if you're into science, engineering, I'm going to have all the links to your pages in the description below. Be sure to check those out. Give them some likes. Follow the exciting developments on the LENR and all the other projects you got going. And, next time we get you on here, hopefully we'll have phase 2 of this thing.
Maybe. we'll try.
All right. This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone. Adios.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.